Okay, welcome to the video series on brainwashing in rail worker death investigation reports by the Transportation Safety Board. This is part 9 of that series, and in this one we're going to be looking at what's included in the reports and, more importantly, what might be left out. Okay, since these videos build on one another, and again, you need to watch them in order. In the previous video, we were looking at things like the timeline and, basic outright lies as far as I'm concerned. For example, the fact that conductor trainee Jason Clooney succumbed to his injuries en route to the hospital. Not true, clearly not true. Because the coroner saw the position of the body, according to the health and safety officer's report on page 30, at the site before the body was removed. And it states in that health and safety officer report also that he quickly succumbed to his injuries because they were so severe. So, the lies, I mean, you got to wonder, why do they keep including all these lies? So, and again, the time of the sunset, a known fact. Why are we giving approximate time? So that we can play the timeline like an accordion to give us the story du jour, to make it look like maybe it wasn't as dark as it really was when we let that poor guy walk off, in the dark as a trainee, unsupervised, in unfamiliar territory, and so on. So that's where we were in the previous video. We were looking at some of this stuff, and now we're going to keep going. Okay, so the next page would be page 6 in the Transportation Safety Board report, and that's the page on the left here. The page on the right comes from the Transport Canada Health and Safety Officer report, and that is page number 71 that you can see at the bottom here. But anyways, there's a lot to unpack here, but if you look at what is on page 6, the Canadian Rail Operating Rules and Canadian National Railway General Operating Instructions for Switching Operations, that's what we're covering here. And specifically, we're looking at Canadian Operating Rule 104B, which states the following. When a switch has been turned, the points must be examined and the target reflector or light, if any, observed to ensure that the switch is properly lined for the route to be used. Now, the reason I included the page from the Health and Safety Officer from Transport Canada is because in that report, you've got the rule here that's given to you. What they don't tell you in the Transportation Safety Board report is that according to the HSO report, when the conductor trainee was tested on this rule, if you look here, in reply to a request for examination questions on switch handling, a copy of CROR 104 question was provided, showing the important part missing. In other words, that part pertaining to making sure that the switch is lined for the intended route to be used, that was missing from the test question, which appears on this second page here. Figure 2.36 is a copy of the test question that was provided by CN to the health and safety officer. And it says, after a switch has been turned, what must be examined and observed? It says the point must be examined and target and light or reflector must be observed. The important part is missing to ensure that the switch is lined for the intended route. And so if you're not properly training people in class, you're not emphasizing what's important about checking the points and why that is so critical. Why should we be surprised that accidents happened when the most important part of that rule was left out of the test question? That's not something that we want to list in the Transportation Safety Board report. And they can't argue to me that they didn't know about this at the Transportation Safety Board when they wrote their report, because the Transportation Safety Board works very closely with Transport Canada. These two investigations were going on at the same time. And also don't forget, Transport Canada and the rail carrier signed off on the Transportation Safety Board report in the interest of advancing rail safety. They signed off on the accuracy of that report and whatever. So, again, more lies, more critical facts left out. Now, if you keep going here, on the page on the left, it shows in the Transportation Safety Board, the peer-to-peer communication between crew members ensure the intended route is clear. Well, if you're not checking the points to verify the intended route, maybe that's not quite clear either. But how are you supposed to verify that the intended route is clear when it's dark? And again, let's not forget there was also no SBU or sense and braking unit on the back of the train, which would, when you're looking to see if there's anything, an oncoming movement coming down the track, that's also an issue. It says visually check the switch targets to confirm the switches are aligned for the intended route. Again, that was the part of the test question that was left out. If in doubt, also confirm the position of the switch points. When a switch is lined by hand, confirm both the position of the points and the target. Then communication during the movement. That's all real nice. Communicate with other crew members and have the other crew member repeat the information. Well, again, garbage in, garbage out. It doesn't matter if the trainee said that he had lined the mainline switch, which the conductor supposedly was saying that was supposed to be 20, or in the Transportation Safety Board report, we're told that the conductor trainee was supposed to line switch TS22. Again, that's put in brackets. Maybe it wasn't specified which mainline switch to, put in normal position. But anyway, again, without a qualified conductor to confirm that the trainee had done the switching operation properly, that he had, first of all, moved the correct switch, and two, that he had placed it in the proper position, with nobody to double check his work, when CN knew that he had problems with switching activities and with working independently, garbage in, garbage out. So he may have thought he lined the proper switch in the proper position, but clearly that was not the case. Or he may have thought he had the right switch when in fact he didn't, or that, he was only supposed to move the one switch because per the job briefing, he was going to be looking after the switch for the interchange track that was to the north of the main line, and probably assumed that the conductor, the supervising conductor, would handle the other two switches. There's a lot of issues here that could be at play. And, it's an assumption as to what really happened that day. Because without the conductor trainee alive to give his side of the story, all we have is the story du jour as far as CN Rail, the National, or the Transportation Safety Board, whatever. And you have to look at all the inconsistencies, I guess is what I'm saying. Now, again, when it says at the bottom here, communicate during the movement. Communicate the position of the derail, whatever, and then another crew member must repeat the information and any other instructions. Again, garbage in, garbage out. There was nobody there to confirm that the trainee had done what he was actually supposed to do. And allowing him to work alone in the dark in unfamiliar territory without direct supervision was in an occupational category for which he was not qualified, was a violation of the law. So the blame, in my opinion, 100% on CN Rail, who had also not properly trained the supervising conductor in how to supervise a trainee. Okay, before I move on, as far as the Transport Canada page here I actually include page 71 and 72 of that report. On page 71 is where we're told that the test question for Rule 104 did not include the important part, which had to do with you had to line the switch and then check the points to ensure that the switch was lined for the intended route. That part was missing in the test question. So they weren't emphasizing that in training. Now, below that, you can see here figure 2.37, which is CN training slide number 53. Well, you're going to want to see the video on what I call deadly training slide number 53. That one's going to require its own video. If you look at page 72 of the HSO report here, it says at the top, as shown in figure 2.37, slide 53 illustrates switch points and correctly explains these as determining the direction of the railway equipment the railway equipment will follow. Training slide 58 notes Rule 104 and includes instructor notes for an exercise with the students, encouraging them to become familiar with Rule 104. Okay, well, it's true. Training slide 53 does correctly explain these as the fact that the points are determining the direction the railway equipment will follow. That's true. But again, it's what we're not being told in matters pertaining to training slide 53 that is the deception and the lie in these reports. So you're not going to want to miss the video on deadly training slide number 53. And again, if you were a conductor trainee and there were rumors in the field that he was being qualified the day he was killed, and I can't confirm that for a fact. And again, remember, the last 5 pages of the supervising conductor's witness statement were withheld. Why were those pages withheld? Were they discussing, the fact that conductor trainee Jason Clooney was being qualified the day he was killed? If somebody was being qualified, and again, it's an if, I don't know it for a fact, but if he was being qualified, what are the odds that the night before he might have been reviewing his training materials, which might have included deadly training slide number 53. So we're going to get into that in a separate video. You're not going to want to miss it. But the other thing I want you to note here is where I put the green arrows. It says, among 4 summary statements is 1 to ensure switch points are lined for the intended route and check the targets. Okay, and then it says, few slides focus on the checks provided by Rule 104 to ensure being lined for the intended route. So, of all the materials that were provided to the Health and Safety Officer by CN Rail for his investigation, few slides discussed Rule 104 as far as checking the points for the intended route. So a huge weakness in the training program. So of the slides on switches, most do not have that emphasis. So that's in the Health and Safety Officer report. But geez, that information again is missing in the Transportation Safety Board report. Why is that if these two organizations work so closely together? Why is it that the report, which is not readily available to the public unless you file an access to information request, why is it that that report has critical information in it that just doesn't seem to make its way to the Transportation Safety Board report, which excludes a whole lot of very critical information when it comes to what caused the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And again, remember, there is that section in the report on causes and contributing factors for the trainee versus risks as far as the rail carrier. A big warping of what actually caused the death or contributed to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. Why is this not listed as a contributing factor in the Transportation Safety Board report? They work closely together, so I don't buy the exclusions I think all this stuff is done on purpose, and it's done to deceive the public. Okay, so the next page in the Transportation Safety Board report pertaining to the deaf and conductor trainee Jason Clooney would be page 7. And I'm just going through and making sure we cover every page in this report. But again, as we go through this, I want you to notice how the conversation is constantly switching, from regulations to, situational awareness to derails and whatever. Note how they're constantly switching your focus. And that's part of the brainwashing too, in my humble opinion. But anyways, the only thing I really want to point out here, on page 7, it says, expect the movement of a train, engine, car, or track unit at any time on any track in either direction. Okay, fine. But if that's true, why wasn't there a supervising conductor trainee there or a supervising conductor there to act as a lookout for the trainee when he was forced to stand in between the tracks or position himself in between the tracks in order to install a derail per the general operating instructions of CN Rail? So, and that's part of the 12 point, I believe, 8 on hand-operated derails and stuff. But they don't tell you in here specifically that they're told to position themselves between the rails. That's not made very obvious here. But it is in the Health and Safety Officer report. But again, it says here, under the part for procedures, or first it says under purpose, derails are installed to protect against unintended movement of equipment. They must be secured in the derailing position whenever the track on which they are installed is not in use. So again, you have those interchange tracks and you don't want the rail cars that were left there to roll back onto the main track, and so you install this unit called a derail, which if those cars end up moving for any reason, they would get derailed on purpose before entering the main track where a train could be coming by. So it says on here in the procedures, look in both directions to ensure no rolling stock is approaching on adjacent tracks prior to operating a derail. Well, again, the conductor trainee was working alone in the dark. He had been told, don't put the SBU, the end of train, the sense and braking unit, that big red flashing light thing on the back of the cars that remained, the 14 cars that were left behind the 3 locomotives that were supposed to go back on the main track to pick up the conductor. So if he had installed the SBU, maybe he could have seen the flashing light coming towards him. But without the SBU on there, he had really no hope of seeing that the train was coming back towards him, that he had lined the wrong switch. So, when you're working in the dark, you don't see the back of a train coming at you if there's no light flashing there to warn you that the train is coming on your track. So again, another issue, but it's what are you told and what is left out, right? Okay, the next 2 pages of this report, pages 8 and 9, which go into the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. And we've covered this in a previous video, but I wanted to come back to this to highlight something that I didn't cover in the other video and which I wanted to cover here. And that is, well, first of all, again, you can see they give you, points 5 here. No railway company shall permit any employee to work as a locomotive engineer, transfer hostler, conductor, or yard foreman unless the employee has qualified for that occupational category in accordance with Section 14. If you notice again, point 2, which referred to the date of this Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation it went into effect, this particular section of this regulation, point 5, July 1st, 1990. So we covered this in a previous video. What we didn't cover is what I'm trying to show you here as far as points 6 through 9. You're going to notice here that I don't know why this is included, points 6 through 9. And the reason is that pretty well all of this refers to a locomotive engineer candidate only. So you don't see anywhere in these points where it refers to a conductor or a conductor trainee. So why would you include point 6 through point 9 here? The next page, and I'm going to come back to this, page 9 or points 19. That again, they try and make it look like, when we have a change to a training program, we just need to file that with Transport Canada within 90 days of implementing the change and we're good. Wrong. This section of the regulation is overridden by the Railway Safety Act, sections 18 and 19, which require that any changes to training programs must first be filed with Transport Canada and reviewed by the minister, and the minister's approval must be provided before a change can be implemented in the field. So again, we're given a regulation, but we're not told that the regulation is overridden by the Railway Safety Act, and that this is actually not true. That it's true that they have to file, but there's a higher level of law, the Act, which states the change must first be approved before it's implemented. Now, let's go back to the first page here, page 8, and points 6 through 9. Under points 6 through 9, I've underlined locomotive engineer candidate in point 6, point 7, locomotive engineer candidate. Again, under A, locomotive engineer. So if you go through this, most of these points have to do with the locomotive engineer. And I'm going to tell you why I think this is important. Again, the last 5 pages of the supervising conductor's witness statement were not provided to me. And as I read this, and given I know that a lot of times they have managers at the controls, I could not help but wonder, was this section included because maybe the locomotive engineer was not really a qualified engineer, but maybe a manager at the controls? And when I'm talking about a manager at the control, that could be an accountant, it could be a programmer. In the rail industry, when things get really hard, especially when we lay off a lot of employees, we often bring in managers and put them at the controls in order to move those trains. And we're going to get into a whole series on managers at the controls and how dangerous that is, with actual examples in a safety board report. But again, the reason here that I'm including this and that I wanted to come back to this is because it's always been in the back of my head. Was that locomotive engineer who was new to the territory, that is how he was described, a locomotive engineer who was new to the territory, was being trained the day conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed. Okay, well, since I've seen so many outright lies in these reports and deceptions and twisted facts, could this be another twisted fact? Could that locomotive engineer who was new to the territory have been a manager? And now, well, I'm going to cover this other little section down here, but there's a reason I have that suspicion. And we're going to go into that. But before I leave this section here, if you look again, the regulation contains on the bottom of the second page, the regulation contains no requirement for a conductor trainee to work under the direction of or remain in close proximity to an on-the-job training instructor for the duration of the employee's training period. Again, more twisting of the facts. We saw that in a previous video, how they're doing a switcheroo here as far as the on-the-job training instructor, because that's not the supervising conductor. So covered that in a previous video. Make sure that you look at the previous videos and watch these in sequence. It is critical you watch them in sequence because they build on each other. So now let's get into the reason I think maybe there might have been a manager at the controls when Jason was killed. And again, just a suspicion. I have absolutely no way of confirming that or of disproving that because I don't have all of the conductor statement, the conductor witness statement for the supervising conductor. 5 pages were left out. All I have is a suspicion, which I'm going to give you. And again, it has to do with why would you include points 6 through 9 here? And you look below here, the little brackets below point 9 before you have this other title here on training programs and consultation. There they show you that there's more of the regulation is missing. Why are those little brackets with the 3 points not after point 5 would be my question. Why did they include points 6 through 9 when those seem to really have to do only with the locomotive engineer and not the conductor trainee? So, this is all discussing a locomotive engineer trainee, not a conductor trainee. So why include points 6 through 9? That's the thing that's been bothering me literally for years. And now I'm going to show you why. Okay, what we have on the left here, again, I received through the access to information request, and you can see the page number, page 66, and then the other one is 143. The 143, I was given a bunch of reports, and the lower page number is the one that puts the whole group of reports in sequence. So out of all the pages I received, that was page 143. But it is a copy of one of Jason Clooney's evaluations when he went on a trip. And so you can see at the bottom here, they provide his name, Clooney, Jason, and then the tasks that he basically was evaluated on that day. And there's a 1 or a 0, whatever. But what I blew up here on the right is the comment that was provided on Jason's evaluation that day. Okay? And it says, was called to pilot the CEO's special train on Watrous Sub, piloted from Saskatoon to Default, then backed the train up from Default back to Saskatoon. Crew of Hale and Sova, I guess that was 2 crew members this day, were 100% compliant to all rules observed, as it was highly expected. Okay, now, so what's happening here is on one of Jason's evaluations, and this was about 1 month before he died, the CEO of the company, that would have been Claude Mongeau at the time, the CEO himself was on a train with conductor trainee Jason Clooney. So, if there was maybe a manager at the controls, because I'll tell you, Saskatchewan seems to be the perfect training ground to put managers at the controls. You wouldn't want to have managers at the controls when they're not that experienced, and they're technically not. They haven't really gone through the entire locomotive or the entire training program for a conductor trainee, the way that a regular conductor trainee would go through that program. And we're going to get into that when we look at managers at the controls. It's a huge issue in my opinion. Granted, some managers do move up from, positions on the front line. So maybe some of them were conductors at one time and then they become managers. fine, if they kept up their qualifications. But others, that's not the case. You definitely have people who were not necessarily on the front lines who become managers at the controls. And so, if you're a manager and you haven't been on the front lines for a long time, there's an issue with that too, as far as what you've lost, as far as your training, communications, whatever. But here's my issue here. If this was the training ground for managers to be at the controls, because Saskatchewan is flat, like it's pretty good training ground, unlike the mountainous regions of, say, Alberta or British Columbia. You'd want to be training people who are managers probably in pretty flat land when you put them at the control, and probably not on the mainline tracks, but in this OCS, occupancy controlled territory, as would have been the case where this accident that killed Jason happened. So that's my suspicion, that this was the CN training ground for managers who were being trained to be at the controls, is what I'm trying to say. So I'm not saying it was the CEO that was at the controls when Jason was killed, but I have a suspicion maybe it was a manager. Because why would you include point 6 to 9 of the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation when it pretty well only has to do with the locomotive engineer? And the fact that those 5 pages of the witness statement for the supervising conductor are also not provided to me just makes me even more suspicious. So, as far as I'm concerned, the Transportation Safety Board needs to confirm one way or the other, was there a manager at the controls when conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed? And there's another issue to that too. If there was a manager at the controls who killed Jason Clooney, would investors not have the right to know that? That these types of things are happening, that there's managers at the controls? Because something like that would definitely make this issue of managers at the controls front and center as far as what's going on in the rail industry. So it's not something I can confirm. It's only a suspicion I have. And given the facts of this case, I think it's a valid suspicion. I'm not saying it's actually the case, but I would want it to be confirmed one way or another, especially if I was the family of conductor trainee Jason Clooney or a rail investor. I think people or a taxpayer, people have the right to know. The general public would have the right to know. Was there a manager at the controls when this conductor trainee was killed? Because again, that would put that whole issue front and center. And it would really highlight a lot of the issues with training programs and what's being done in practice in the rail industry that puts not only frontline workers like trainees at risk, but the general public also, in my humble opinion. So that's my issue. And also the other issue I want to raise here before I move on this, where I blew up the comment. Note here it says, crew of Hale and SOVA were 100% compliant to all rules observed as it was highly expected. Yes, we put probably our best conductor and our best locomotive engineer at the controls that day when we had the CEO on board. But this is supposed to be an evaluation for the conductor trainee, and there is not one comment as to how the conductor trainee did that day on this evaluation. So where's the focus here? Is it just on the CEO? And geez, might the fact that there's a CEO or maybe a manager at the controls make that impact situational awareness on the day that conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed? There's a lot of issues that could be at play here, and because so much is not disclosed, or facts are twisted, or we have outright lies, it's hard to get at all the facts. But a court case certainly could get to all these facts. I'm not a lawyer. I can't force them to disclose the last 5 pages of the conductor witness statement. I can't force somebody on a witness stand to say, was there a manager at the controls that day? when the locomotive killed, or the train backed up and killed conductor trainee Jason Clooney? I can't get to those questions or get to those answers, but somebody certainly can. So again, just a suspicion I have. Can't confirm it one way or another, but I did want to raise it because when I read that whole section 6 through 9 of that investigation report, I couldn't help but ask, why is this in here? Because it has nothing to do with the conductor trainee. It only has to do basically with the locomotive engineer trainee. So, was it a manager at the controls that was a locomotive engineer being trained as far or familiarized with the territory that day? I don't know. I'm just raising it as a question. And in my opinion, it's a valid question because of how this report by the Transportation Safety Board is written. Okay, pages 10 through 11 we covered in another video. I'm just trying to show you again how report layouts also are part of the brainwashing. Okay, so we're going to keep going with that. I've already covered these 2 pages in another video, so I'm going to move on. Okay, again, report layout, just note how it's happening. You know, you got parts on the trainee here, you know, you've got regulations pertaining to the trainee over here, you got sections on derails over here, and then we go back to more on the trainee, then we put more stuff on you know, situational awareness, and now we're getting back into manual derails on page 13. So there's a lot of flip-flopping that goes on, and again, to me, that just further helps with the brainwashing, you know, because it's, to me, these reports are all over the place. It's like, address one subject, give me the regulation, then address why that's an issue, or at least, you know, provide in here or next to, you know, the section on Rule 104, you know, geez, why didn't we include the fact that the most important part was not addressed in training or on the test question, basically, you know, as far as checking the points for the intended route, that it wasn't covered properly in training as far as the health and safety officer was concerned, per his report. So again, just note, these reports, the movement back and forth, be very aware of things like the report layout and how it helps with the brainwashing. That's all I'm trying to say here. Okay, again, these next pages had to do with the derails and, you know, again, just more stuff on report layout and how it impacts the reader and your focus. Okay, and here on page 16, we pick up on the analysis again, which to me, I don't know, I feel that this belonged more with the timeline stuff, that should have all been together. So again, just issues on report layout and how it is used in brainwashing, when you separate the facts, whatever. Okay, so in concluding here, you know, when you're considering situational awareness, what's left in, what is left out of reports, you know, to me, the whole argument on situational awareness is so bogus because you're replacing facts, known facts, with assumptions. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that could impact a conductor trainee's situational awareness. And as we saw previously, I added points 12 and 13 to here, but, you know, the wrong switch numbers, working alone without a direct supervisor in violation of the law, working in the dark, in unfamiliar territory. You know, when CN knew he had problems with working alone and with switching operations. And in the job briefing prior to arriving there, you know, all had agreed in violation of Section 5 that the conductor trainee would handle the interchange track which only had one switch, TS-23, also referred to by all three other crew members as TS-15. And so Jason really had no reason to think that he would be handling any other switch. And the supervising conductor, per the job briefing, was the one who was supposed to handle the elevator tracks. He was the one who had first reversed TS-22 and who was also working TS-21. And so, again, why would Jason think he was supposed to work TS-21? And if he's given a command to, or an instruction to, put the mainline track switch in normal position, given there were two switches, TS-22 and TS-23, that touched the main line, if it wasn't specified as to which switch he was supposed to flip to normal position, when he may not have been expected to have to work TS-22, if the switch that he was supposed to flip back to normal position was not specified, that would have impacted his situational awareness too, especially since he's working in the dark in unfamiliar territory. It was the end of the day. He probably got killed within, the last few operations before they were heading back home, probably the last, 10 minutes or so before the work was done for the day. And again, this happened in late November, so, it would have been fairly cold that day too, which, you're tired, it's been a long day, and you're ready to go home. A lot of things impact situational awareness, but not having a supervising conductor there to monitor what you're doing is huge. And that I would put on both CN and Transport Canada for not having done their jobs. And then there's also perhaps because of the the whole thing that the test question did not talk about, it didn't properly instruct trainees on why it was so critical to check the points. And let's see, Rule 104, if I'm down on point 12 here, Rule 104, the test question excluded the important part of why you need to check the points for the intended route. And that part was not, per the Transport Canada Health and Safety Officer, not emphasized in class training, per what we saw in that report. Now, and also the last issue, which could impact your situational awareness as a conductor trainee working out there, could there have been a manager at the controls or a rail executive at the controls when conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed? If there's a rail executive, somebody high up in the company that might have been getting trained or familiarized in the territory that day, as had been the case when, there was a CEO a month earlier on a train with conductor trainee Jason Clooney, could there have been a rail executive on the train that day that was going to be used as a manager in the field? Could that have been the person being familiarized? I have no way of knowing. I just have a suspicion because of the way the Transportation Safety Board is written when it includes those points 6 through 9 of the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, when that really only has to do with a locomotive engineer trainee, not a conductor trainee. So why include those points 6 through 9 in this report? That's my question. Was there a reason for that? Was it because there was a manager at the controls, or maybe a rail executive? And until that question is answered definitely one way or another, I'm going to keep having that suspicion. So again, all things that could impact situational awareness, all things that impact brainwashing as far as what you're told, what you're not told, what facts are twisted, what facts are left out, all of it. It all plays into this. And so I'm pretty sure that I've now covered every page in that report. So my next video will be one on lessons learned via this report. And then we're going to get into, I will probably be getting into the deadly training slide number 53 for the video after the lessons learned. Okay, so you're not going to want to miss that one. So hope you're having a great day, and I will see you on the next one. Okay, so this concludes part 9 of the brainwashing series. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, because that really helps this message to get out to more and more people. So if you could do that, I would greatly appreciate it. And on that one, I will see you in the next video on lessons learned.